Good afternoon, and I want to welcome everybody to our third virtual event through Community Conversations. And this is a new series that we developed to try to build and maintain community as we get through this very unusual time. I'm delighted to have two very special guests here today. One is Dr. Sonja Santelises. She's class of 1989 at Brown. And the other is Shalinee Sharma, class of 99. And both of them are here with me virtually today. And we're going to talk about K through 12 education with a focus on what's going on right now with kids in school during this time of coronavirus. So first, let me just start with some housekeeping. This conversation will last about 45 minutes. And after I introduce our two speakers, we'll have a conversation. We'll hold time at the end for audience Q&A, and if you have a question, and we really will save time for questions, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom and send your question to Marguerite Utes, who's serving as our moderator. So please get those questions ready. So let me give an introduction. Dr. Sonja Santelises, she is the CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools, and she has spent close to 30 years building high quality teaching and learning to help students excel in K through 12 schools. She's had a very long and very distinguished career. Previously, she was vice president for K-12 policy and practice at the Education Trust, providing strategic direction for the organization's research, practice, and policy work. Before that, she was chief academic officer for Baltimore City Public Schools, where she had gone to from Boston, where she served an assistant superintendent for pilot schools and assistant superintendent for teaching and learning and professional development. And of course, you know, I could go on and talk about a number of other things, but the fact is she's been really steeped in these issues of K through 12 education for quite some time. She's a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Brown University. She holds a Master of Arts degree in Education Administration from Columbia University and a Doctor of Education in Administration, Planning, and Social Policy from Harvard University. And she's lived in Baltimore with her husband and their 3 daughters since 2010. So Shalinee Sharma is co-founder and CEO of Zern. And this is a really exciting not-for-profit curriculum publisher and software developer that is on a mission to ensure that all children love learning math. And Zern created Zern Math, which is a K through 5 print and software-based math curriculum and professional development platform that supports daily differentiation and engagement in mathematics teaching and learning. And Zern currently works with hundreds of thousands of teachers and more than 1 million students nationwide to build an inclusive classroom communities where all students have equal opportunities to belong and to deeply learn about math, which is fantastic. Shalinee currently serves as the Gates Foundation Middle Years Mathematical Advisory Board, and she's a Pahara Aspen Fellow. Prior to Zern, she spent more than a decade at Bain & Company, leading work for clients in technology, financial services, and education. She has an MBA from Harvard and, of course, a BA from Brown. So that's my introduction, and I'm really looking forward to starting the conversation. So, you know, we're in an unprecedented time of school closures and stay-at-home orders due to COVID-19. Schools across the states and nation are grappling with the transition to distance learning and also concerned about what the long-term impacts of this might be for their children's academic success, their students' academic success. Many people on this call know that just yesterday, the governor of Rhode Island announced that the state will continue distance learning for the rest of the academic year. And I think a lot of other school districts are in the same spot. So what I thought we could do is start talking, and maybe we can start with Sonja. You know, where is Baltimore now? How would you characterize the shift to remote learning? I assume that's what you're doing, but tell us a little bit about what you've been up to.
Yeah, so, well, thanks. One, it's always good to be with fellow Vernonians. So it's great to be here. I think where we are in Baltimore is one, we're just ending our 3rd week of virtual learning that actually included a combination of computer technology and that kind of virtual learning. The other piece is because we had about a 1-to-4 technological device to student ratio, we had to really accelerate and actually prioritize the acquisition of technology. We prioritized our high schools, and literally with a week of training, I have to give a lot of our city schools teachers credit. We went from maybe a smattering, a handful of Google Classrooms to over 10,000 after a week. I just right before this forum, I completed our weekly, really daily now, COVID-19 call. And so we've reached about, I'd say 75% of Baltimore City public school students, either through our actual virtual classrooms, or we've also used some of our cable TV stations to help broadcast lessons. We had a curriculum partner, Great Minds, that helped stand up quick lessons. And then I'd say we probably have another 11% of students who are still reliant on paper packets, kind of good old fashioned paper packets. A lot of communication lately, nationally and locally, as I'm sure a lot of folks know, about the pre-existing digital divide and the impact of that, particularly in this climate. So even with devices, we can't always guarantee that students will have connectivity. The other piece that I would say is we have had a very real priority in Baltimore City, as in other areas, for kind of basic necessities of families being met. And number one for us has been feeding. That has been going, I would say, very well. But what it really does expose is that a school nutrition program that was never designed to be a community feeding program over a prolonged period of time has been strained. In Baltimore City, we're fortunate that we actually partner with other city agencies like Recreation and Parks to do that. But as an example, we started out probably serving 6,000 meals the first week, and last count yesterday was that we were up to 12,000 meals. So as the crisis is prolonged, no surprise, I'm sure, to everybody listening, what happens is the need sparks, the need for food sparks very sharply. We've had great partnerships with that. We have a World Central Kitchen, which came in this week, that has added about 7,000 meals for us here. But to give folks a sense of the strain on just existing systems, school districts only get compensated for a portion of student meals. We made the decision here in Baltimore City very early to also feed adults. Who were standing in line for lunches, that additional cost to the district is probably somewhere now around just under $275,000. And so each day, those expenses climb. And then there's also the social emotional needs. So while we are thrilled that in a school district that had 1-to-4 ratio of device to student, that we've reached 75% of those students virtually. The students that keep me up at night are the students that we haven't reached. And so that has really been a combination of old-fashioned kind of reaching out. We've had teachers and principals who've gone above and beyond. So cell phone calls, Instagram, there are lots of young people that we have found through social media, even if not through traditional means. So I think on the ground here in Baltimore, we've had a lot of community support and gathering together, but clearly here, as in a lot of traditionally under-resourced communities, you see the strain of the lack of access to resources for daily life is absolutely taking its toll.
Right. So I want to come back a little bit later and talk, more detail about what advice you're giving teachers. But I think just to frame it, because you raised this really important issue about the digital divide and different families have access to different resources. And one thing that's coming out very clearly in this pandemic is that we know that the burden of the pandemic, both in terms of health and also in terms of economic status, is really exacerbating pre-existing inequities across income groups and racial groups. So, I know that Shalinee has been, through Zern, able to collect a lot of data, really interesting data that shows how the Zern package is being used, how math learning is proceeding. And Shalinee, do you want to say a little bit about your window into this pandemic? And I know you have some data you might want to share with us.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And hi, Sonja. I so admire and appreciate the work you've been doing in Baltimore. So Zern Math is a math platform that's modern in the sense that we're real-time getting data of what's happening, who's logging in, who's using it. And presently our reach extends to about 60,000 schools across the country. And just the denominator there's about 120,000 schools. So that's a fairly large number. And I'd love to share my screen and show you kind of the couple things we're seeing. But the headline is, it is like the devastating Matthew effect. So it's not just that poor communities are doing less math on Zern, it's that affluent communities are doing more math. But the second thing is that leadership really matters in the way that Sonja is describing and the way that she's an example of. And so I just love to share my screen and see if I can do this and just show you some of the data. So this first slide is the United States overall. And what you can see here, what we're showing is from the dates March 2nd, which is before anything started going really crazy in our data, all the way to April 6th, where obviously lots of crazy stuff started. And this is representing 54,000 schools in this data set. And so what you can see basically, and then across the bottom, you can see here different income cutoffs by zip code. And so if you look at the far right, that's 70% up. So for zip codes where the median income is 94,000 or more, children are doing almost double the math they were once doing on our site. And then if you look all the way down at the less than 35,000 zip code, you can see that they're doing a lot less math than they used to do on our site. But what's important when you see this is, folks smarter than myself look at this and say, well, Shalinee, this is representing the inequities that are already present in our society. What I would say is this is not what the data looked like before COVID, but I just wanted to take a moment and show you that it doesn't look like this across the whole country. So for example, Rhode Island, this is what's happening in Rhode Island. So similar to Sonja's approach of sort of just jumping in whether or not it was permitted or allowed. The state commissioner of Rhode Island, from what we know, Angelica Infante Green, jumped in and engaged in a series of activities, laptop distribution, requiring district plans, a series of activities, and the data looks really different. And so of course you can still see here that wealthier communities are better off, but high poverty communities are not in as bad shape. And I'll just show you quickly a couple more states. This is Florida. And then this is Michigan, right? So obviously, if folks are doing better than the average, other folks have to be doing worse than the average. And so we can see that in our data. I'll just show you one more, which is Massachusetts, just because it's nearby.
Which is doing well. So when you look at those data, and I guess, I want to bring Sonja into the conversation too. I think one thing people are really worried about is, we talk about summer melt all the time. How do you think this period is going to translate into gains in learning and catch up that may be needed next year? Hopefully things will be back to normal. How concerned are you about what's going to sort of long run effects on students?
Chris, is that to me or to Sonja?
Both of you.
Go ahead.
So I would just start with saying that thinking about my own children who are going to be just fine, the first thing that school provides children is a community and friends and teachers who love them, and they love their teachers, right? So I'd say that type of effect is maybe harder to measure and quantify in these kinds of charts, but one that we shouldn't underestimate. But charts are helpful for measuring some of the things, and those kinds of things are quite easy to measure in mathematics. And I would say in the K-5 math world, for example, something that to me is jaw-dropping to consider is that most fourth graders would be oriented to decimals and decimal operations and begin to explore those right now. So across America, that in most curricula, we would be exploring decimal operations, let's say sometime between March 1st and May 15th. So that's a very big deal. If we think about the structure of base 10 and everything we want kids to know, and what our data set says seventh graders struggle most with is decimal operations. So I think there are no question critical areas of math that children are missing right now, that we can get even more detailed in than just sort of describing the summer melt or things that are that broad. And I would say my hope is we start addressing those now, as opposed to only waiting till next year.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Sonja, how are you thinking about this?
No, and a lot of what Shalinee described is definitely resonates. And I think what's really helpful about the data that she presented is it actually shows, to her earlier point, that you can make a difference even with existing disparities. And oftentimes we talk about educational and skill gaps as if they are pro forma. They are just so baked in the system that you can't interrupt the trajectory. And the power of just those few slides that you shared, Shalinee, is that it really does show the impact of really targeted intervention. And I think the point about the decimals is spot on. And I would say, as a district that's had a heavy focus on literacy, there are similar patterns even in ELA, right? So that we also know, for example, in Baltimore City, that that young people who change schools more than 2 or 3 times during the year, during the period when you learn to read, first and foremost. So like between kindergarten and second grade, are at least 5 times more likely in our system to then have later reading challenges. And so one of the things that we've started looking at is what are those kind of key skills, and how do we actually work with curriculum partners, which is why a lot of the work that Zern's doing is so important, is how do we actually pinpoint what those key skills are that we need to assess where young people are, and then actually match the teaching far more directly than we might normally do. And I think that's something which is what's great about this conversation. I just had a meeting this week with some of our formative assessment partners. So not the folks that do the large end of the year state tests, but the folks that actually give us data at various points during the year about where we are. And, one of the things we talked about is, Sonja, the data already exists to be able to match where a young person's holes might be, for lack of a better term, and to be able to target those. The question is, how do we now do that systemically and in a period of time where that community that I think Shalinee rightly referenced is ruptured or is not as strong and immediate as it could be. And so I think that has great impact. And I completely agree. We've got the systems of feeding down and we have to fine tune those. We know how to get kids packets. We've already begun, what I think most people are calling educational recovery. Like what are we going to do in 3 months, 4 months? How does summer look different?
Mhm.
Who are we targeting? How are we matching students to teachers in ways we didn't do before? But I completely agree. This needs to be the discussion instead of kind of fixating on, isn't it just horrible that this is exacerbating gaps? But yeah.
So how are you, I mean, the teacher, Shalinee, your point that, teachers are so beloved by students and they're so important. And so now you have teachers who are trying to teach remotely, and many of them have kids of their own who are home with them. I mean, it's hard to imagine what are you doing to really support teachers during what must be an incredibly difficult time?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and that comes both to, again, it's a question for both of you, because I know Zerns does so much with professional development, and Sonja, you must be really focused on supporting your teachers. They're your frontline employees, yeah?
That's right. That's right. Shalinee, I didn't know if you wanted to go.
Sure, I'll start. So I would say that, so on March 16th, which was the day that schools closed across the country, we saw a 30 times increase to our site. So it was like truly a tidal wave that hit our site in terms of signups, and that included states calling us and asking for support, and individual parents signing up, right? It was the full gamut in that sort of 30x tidal wave. And what we've been trying to do two things. The first is just support everything coming at us. And then the second is to actually think of what people need ahead of time and give it to them before they ask us thousands of questions. And so when we have a little bit of time, we're like, oh, let's plan here a little. And I think, one of the things that we're trying right now, if you think about when you are in crisis and when you are overwhelmed, you just need only the information you need, and you need it as clearly as possible. I think the other thing that you need to think about that we've been working on and realizing is teachers and schools don't need sort of a complicated discussion right now. They need an email they can forward to the parents or a packet that can go home that's available in English and Spanish and other languages. So they need to move right to action. And so I think it's a great bar to hold ourselves to as a vendor that supports schools and districts, which is how can we give teachers exactly what they need, where they look at that and they say, thank you, and they send it to their families. So I think that's kind of the number one support we're trying to provide to teachers, which is just make it easier for them. But I think the second thing is just webinars. We're doing, so for example, yesterday we had a webinar for teachers on how Zern supports accessibility for children who have specific learning differences, and what is the feature set that allows children with specific learning differences to still utilize Zern. Next week, we're doing one on supports for English language learners. So I think we're calling them kind of like micro PD, but 30-minute webinars that we're running where we're actually helping resource teachers. These are teachers that typically support students who have SPED, who have like IEPs and individual educational plans. And we're just trying to help teachers who are coming at us, who are serving different special populations. And let's be clear, every classroom in America has a child who is, who's going to fit inside these characteristics, if not many children, right? So we call this special, but this is actually just what teaching and learning is. And so that's sort of the second thing, is how can we give you the most bite-sized PD that you need right now? I think the third thing that we're seeing just now starting is supporting teachers and schools and districts with virtual professional development. So the summer is a great time for teachers to learn something new. In our case, that would be exploring more deeply the structure of K-5 mathematics or K-8 mathematics. And so we're starting to work with schools and districts to create virtual summer PD days. So that would be the kind of three things I'd share.
Mm-hmm. And what are you doing to support teachers, Sonja?
So I think, so first really was in the area of professional learning. And for us, it was just very brass tacks that we had folks who did not know how to manage a virtual platform, did not know how to conduct a class, didn't know the difference between asynchronistic and synchronistic. And really it was an opportunity to have teacher leaders take the lead, which was great. It was actually really, and we heard from a lot of teachers that they appreciated the fact that some of their colleagues who were actually fairly fluent in the technology were willing to share their expertise. That was initially, I will say 3 weeks in. A lot of it really is also connected to just very social, emotional, personal engagement on the part of teachers. Teachers are feeling really deeply what their young people are going through, and in some cases are having their own traumas. I spoke to a teacher a few weeks ago who was not sure whether her own husband might have come down with COVID-19, and she was processing that at the same time that she was trying to hit her targets, for writing prompts and getting feedback to students. And so as kind of instructionally focused as I like to be in this kind of setting, we've had to really, what I call, stir in a cup of grace and a lot of compassion as we're moving through this. So it's this balancing act between supporting teachers in the technology, supporting them in their content, but then also providing a different level of flexibility and support for them personally. And that's the part that just, I think, gets compounded as we move through.
Yeah. So I want to switch to Q&A in a few minutes, but there was one other topic that I wanted to explore. I mean, and I'll tell you a little bit about Brown. We also had the very abrupt transition to remote teaching and learning, and faculty who I think 3 years ago would have said, I don't want to have anything to do with this, are now learning and they're doing things in new ways. And while it's really tough, I'm starting to look at this and say, okay, maybe there's a silver lining here. Maybe we can learn how to do things better and differently than we hadn't been doing before. So I guess for both of you, you're always looking for silver linings. I mean, do you see that in your worlds, that maybe some really good, new, interesting, innovative things are going to come out of this period?
No, I would say absolutely for us. And I had this conversation yesterday with our 14 principal supervisors. And one of the things that one of them said, who shall remain nameless, was this was the push in the deep end of the pool, right? So all of the resistance that we might have felt, folks who thought, well, that's not really for me, it really was the push in the deep end of the pool. Now we have to be there to support people because we don't want folks drowning in the process. But some of what we've seen, and I'm sure some of this is also true at the university level, is families have far greater visibility into what their young people are learning. And they're beginning to pick up some of the differences between classrooms. And I think it's a good pressure, frankly. I think it's a good pressure on those of us who are charged with leading and learning. And then one more piece that I would say that we're looking at as we look at education recovery, which, organizations like, Shalinee's have been doing for a while, is how do we now leverage this focus on technology to get our most experienced and successful teachers in front of our young people who need them most. And so quite frankly, I've heard from some teachers who appreciate that there is a video that we developed with our Great Minds partners, that they can then come and wrap around students' understanding. And they might not be as, frankly, comfortable with the full teaching of decimals, but now they feel like, one, they have a model for that, and they can come around and support students in direct ways. So one of the things we're thinking about is how do we leverage now technology to give greater access to some of the teachers we already know in the data are the most successful in moving the growth of young people. And this actually might be an opportunity to begin to implement differentiated roles for educators, as opposed to just everybody has their own one class and that's all they do. So we have been talking about that. And I do think it presents opportunity as long as there are the resources and support to accompany it.
And what you're seeing is teachers might be excited about exploring different modes.
Yes, I do. And there are some that are still feeling incredibly overwhelmed, but by and large, teachers have been fabulous. And I think we need to use that capital, that very human capital,
Yeah,
to now leverage things that we might not have been willing to do 6 weeks ago.
right. And Shalinee, I mean, I guess you're what you do is sort of, it's already very innovative, but are you learning new things through this experience?
I mean, I'm learning that 30 times, if you have, so it used to be, yeah, I would say like my stress capacity is much higher than I thought it was. So I would say that's the first thing I've learned. But I think when I think about what I hope will be different, I hope there will be, so in K-12, we assess children in 2 ways, formative and summatively. So formatively, we say, this child did a diagnostic and they know and don't know these things, and they therefore are categorized as X. This child who's a 4th grader is really in 2nd grade math. Okay. And then we at the end of the year, we assess in a high stakes summative way, right? So you pass the test, or you're, exceed expectations on the test, or you're unsatisfactory. What I would love to see happen is actually, be it with teachers, districts, parents, more transparency on children if they've actually learned decimals. So, one thing that's interesting is, for example, like we can see across our full data set, and it's actually millions of children. So, 4 or 5 million children, depending on the day, we can see how many are doing decimal work right now in 4th grade. And you can kind of heat map it. And far fewer are doing decimal work than they should be, even though they're on the site. And so then in the end, when we say in the summer, or when we say next year, and we say, oh, we have this big learning loss. Well, okay, but why can't they just all start doing decimal work right now, right? Like, and so what I would love to see is actually a transition from sort of diagnosing the problem to data and data systems that are tracking progress against success. And I think that's what technology offers. And what I'm hoping is now, we've been offering that, as you say, for 5 years. And I think folks were like, I don't know what to do with that. Whereas now, maybe we have a moment finally to say, state, this entire state, Rhode Island, here's how many of your 4th graders are doing decimals right now. Put them all there, have them all start working.
Yeah, good. So I lied. I have one more quick question for both of you, which is, we have been working very hard this year to develop a supportive, constructive relationship with the Providence Public Schools. A little bit disrupted by COVID, but I think we're actually making very good progress on developing plans. And just from your perspectives, what do you hope for in a university partnership? And Sonja, I don't know where Baltimore is on this.
Yes, and by the way, Providence got a great superintendent. I think Harrison.
They did. I met him last week. He's fantastic.
He is. Harrison's a great colleague and doing, I think, great work already. So I think some of it is being in a listening mode to see where the most appropriate support is. So I kind of start with that. Because Providence clearly has some of the very same struggles that Baltimore has, but they're in a different place, just by virtue of history and context, and the same is true here. One of the things that we are really leveraging with our university partners, it varies based on institution. So some of our partners, we're looking to, in a very kind of straightforward way. Sorry if the violin music starts chiming in. But in some of those cases, like, we will have engineering students who are actually helping with some of the one-on-one catch-up work, because we know that particularly for our older students, the one-on-one does far better. They do far better with that. So, I mean, everything from engineering students helping to tutor, and to, quite frankly, some curriculum mapping that we did with Johns Hopkins that was really, really helpful. And a review, for example, for us of our science curriculum. Like, how do we actually take science in elementary grades and do a better job with the supplementing of that? And they've been wonderful partners in that. So I will say, I think the advantage, the posture for me is actually going with where the district is and its developmental curve on improvement.
Mhm.
But those are the places in Baltimore. And then frankly, again, because Brown's a major research institution, I think providing some of the research heft that we just can't do because we don't have the same level of analysis. So we've gone to University of Maryland to do some of our analyses that we just, we don't have doctoral students who can do that. And I don't want to underestimate the importance of different cuts at analysis and seeing things that we just don't have time to see, frankly.
Yeah, thank you. And Shalinee, do you want to say anything before we turn to questions on that? I know you have a lot of university partnerships.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say, I would echo what Sonja just ended with, and it would be true for Providence, and it's certainly true for us, which is, education is a very data-rich field. We have an incredible amount of data, and like folks like John Friedman and a lot of the work you're doing at Brown in general, Chris, is about bringing data analysis into all of these different fields of learning. And education it will be very difficult to kind of move educational policy choices forward without actually extraordinarily sophisticated analyses of what we're seeing and what we're not seeing happening. And so I think that is the place for partnerships with our data, but also partnerships with just the data that's sitting inside of states and districts.
Good, thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it to questions, and I think our moderator will read questions in from the audience. I hope we have some.
Yes, thank you, President Paxson. We've received a number of questions, and unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them. But for the first one, this one picks up on the conversation you just had about research and data. And actually, for you, Chris, you're an economist, and you did research on the trauma that parents and children felt following and during Hurricane Katrina. And do you see, unfortunately, do you see any similarities to what is happening now? And could you talk about what you could potentially see and research moving forward on K-12 education?
So this is a question for me. Yeah, so yes, I was involved in a study of low-income mothers who are involved in community colleges programs in New Orleans, as well as some other cities. And Hurricane Katrina sort of cut right through the middle of that study. The community colleges closed, but me and a team of researchers tracked those families. The study is actually still going on. I'm no longer involved, but to really look at the long-run implications of this disaster on the lives of these families. And, I think one of the main takeaways, which is maybe relevant here, but maybe it's a little bit different, which is social support was so important. And, people were blown up, their communities were dispersed, their churches were shut. And it was, people who were able to develop social support, who were able to come back to New Orleans and kind of reintegrate into communities, ended up doing better in terms of mental health over the long run. So the other point from that study is the impact of this hurricane, long after the FEMA trucks had closed up shop and gone away, 5 years later, families were still feeling the traumatic effects in terms of stress and mental health problems for quite some time. So I think one thing we have to remember in this instance, and again, it's going to be different, but to kind of think, okay, we have a treatment or we have a vaccine, this is over. I think we have to be a little bit careful and make sure that we're not overlooking longer run impacts. That would be my takeaway.
Great. Next question. So we've received a number of questions about the summer. Some people are wondering whether schools and districts are thinking about continuing summer learning in various forms. People are asking about, typically the summer is an opportunity for academic and co-curricular enrichment, and obviously a lot of that has changed. And so people are looking for advice in terms of how they can support students and children during this summer. Do either of you have any ideas?
One of the things, I would just say this, one of the ideas and admonitions that I received from our Baltimore City Teacher Advisory Council that I have been meditating on is the need to reestablish community when in the midst of whatever the next iteration of this crisis is going to look like. And one of the ways that we have been most successful in doing that, because Baltimore City has committed for years to, continue summer learning and enrichment opportunities for students, particularly those with the greatest need, both academically and economically. But I will say this, part of our planning has been around how do we continue to use the arts to be able to connect with kids, and those relationships are really very important. And I can't stress that enough, that we have heard from young people who are saying, like, school is their link for all that is wrong with schools, for all that should and could be better with schools. They are still anchors in many communities. And so part of how we've looked at summer is, one, how do we help teachers get ready for phase 2 within the fall? And then how do we help young people make connections that, yes, can be curricularly based, but actually are the opportunities for some of those same things we've learned over summer for years, in helping to use creativity, the arts, to be able to reconnect kids to a sense of community. Because overall, that's what we're hearing from kids from every economic group. I mean, I always share the story of my own daughter, who is, does incredibly well academically, but who just had a meltdown one day and came in and slipped a note under the door when I was in a meeting like this and just said, dear mommy and daddy, I'm really tired of this. And I don't like being online all day. It makes me not feel as smart. And it makes me hate COVID-19 even more, right? And this is a kid who, based on her test score or her formative assessment, people would say should be the last in line to get any support. But it was the need for that community. And that's when I talk to young people, what they are saying most often is that the moves that we have made thus far make them feel seen and cared for. And it is that's the foundation that then allows them to connect with anything we're asking them to do academically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Shalinee, do you have any advice for people on the summer?
So we're getting we're having quite a few conversations with states and districts about, I would describe it as optional extended learning programs that that certain groups want to opt into. And can we design targeted learning opportunities for children so that this 25% of the school year that has been interrupted and disrupted, can we do our best to stem that, so when children come back in the fall, they're better set up. And so we are presently designing those programs, and we'll put them up on our website for everyone to see. But it does look like a not small number of states will come together and try to put something together like that.
Good. So do we have more questions? I think we have time for maybe one more.
Great, thank you. So there are a number of questions asking for, we've talked a little bit about silver linings, but what are you looking forward to during the summer and potentially the fall and whenever the reopening of schools, but sort of what's helping you move forward every day?
My own children back in a school building. That's like the thing I'm most looking forward to. I just don't know if it's supposed to be more profound than that, but when I can drop my children off in the school building, I will I mean, I will just get down on my knees and cry. I can't wait.
And Sonja, what about you?
That real. That was perfect. I should just piggyback on what she said. Yeah, I'm looking forward to being able to reconnect in some form. You know, even if it's smaller groups of students, we probably won't for a very long time be able to have everybody back in all the time. But I am looking forward to just the connection. We were giving out laptops in one of our sites, and kids were coming to school, and I got nervous because social distancing went out the window. They were just so glad to see one another. And so you had adults like, wait, you've got to stay. Oh, all right. So yeah, I would agree with that, both from a personal level and a professional level. I think you hit it right on point. Shalinee.
Well, look, thanks so much to both of you for taking time out of the end of what I'm sure was a very, very busy week. I hope you stay healthy and safe and get a little bit of downtime over the weekend. Thank you.
You as well.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.